welcome to a new episode of Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. And today we are going to talk about kind of one of my weird fascinations that I'm very excited to delve into, and that is the history of circus sideshows. And before before we dive in, I do want to, of course, say that there may be some outdated language in this when referring to certain acts and things. Obviously, these are also called freak shows. We'll get into a bit of that, how that language, changed and how people perceive that. And of course, there are terms for different types of folks that are not necessarily PC anymore that were used to describe acts. So please bear with me for historical accuracy. But I want to just talk a bit about this is a chapter of human history I just have always found fascinating, and also kind of I want to have the conversation of exploitation versus empowerment for some of these folks who worked these jobs. So I'll start out with a little bit of the history behind this. So it dates back as far as the 1840s, actually, which I didn't realize it went that far back. And this type of entertainment became really popular as the industrialization era kind of started happening in America. This allowed for leisure time, which a lot of people had not had significant leisure time to spend before industrialization started. And as this happened, people began looking for different forms of entertainment, different ways to fill the time. And one thing that kind of sprung up from this was dime museums, which were kind of expositions of oddities, wild animals, curiosities, things that couldn't be seen anywhere else. And kind of our big player in this was P.T. Barnum.
Of course.
And he starts what is the most popular of the dime museums, called Barnum's American Museum. And it was really interesting learning more about him too, just what a marketer he was. Like, he really was, like the greatest showman.
One might even say.
But yeah, I mean, learning about how he was really the reason this form of entertainment took off, and how he would, basically generate word of mouth by, having people, like, paying people to go out and, like, yell at people, "Oh my God, I saw this amazing thing." Like real guerrilla marketing. He was kind of a
It's
genius.
like influencers, right?
Literally, he was the first the first big influencer. And so his first big exhibit, the Dime Museum is originally kind of a museum, but Barnum realizes there is an opportunity here for live entertainment. And his first big exhibit, is a woman by the name of Joyce Heth. And the claim here is that she was 161 years old.
All right.
And that she was George Washington's nurse when he was a child, like his birth
his, like,
nurse.
nanny.
Yeah, and so people would pay to come in and hear her tell stories, to hear her. She would sing songs, and basically just to marvel at this 161-year-old woman. Now, later, after she passes, medical examiners found her to be 80 years old.
Darn.
I know, right?
This is a shocking twist, and I'm very disappointed.
I wasn't ready. I had no idea. But the interesting thing that Barnum finds in this situation is that people didn't really care. People didn't really care that they had been bamboozled.
Yeah.
Barnum didn't really care that she wasn't what she said she was. And he discovers, like, people will pay for the entertainment and the shock value, even if the claims are maybe not what they appear to be. So he decides, of course, how am I going to capitalize on this? He turns the museum into an entertainment center at that point, completely revamps it. It becomes an exhibit for live, alive. And some of the most popular exhibits are the Fiji mermaid.
Oh, yep, I'm familiar with
um,
that one.
yes, which, if you aren't familiar, was created by sewing a monkey's torso to a fish tail. This kind of reminded me of the Hodag
Oh,
situation
yeah,
where
for
he
sure.
made like the puppet.
Yes.
Yeah, he's got the Fiji mermaid. As far as live acts, some of you may be familiar with Chang and Ang, the Siamese twins. They were a very famous duo, and I definitely had heard about them many
Mhm.
times. And then a woman who was a giantess from
Ooh.
uh, Eastern Europe. She was like, I think like 7'2" or something. So those were some of his popular things. And then the kind of the like one of the most famous sideshow acts of all time is a gentleman who Barnum found him as a very young boy, and he never grew past like 2 feet tall.
Mhm.
But he was very perfectly proportioned. Otherwise, he looked like a miniature man, and so Barnum basically raises him to and trains him to become this world class performer, and renames him Tom Thumb
Mhm.
after after Tom Thumb, and then gives him this title of General Tom Thumb to appeal. He makes him an Englishman in this performance act because I guess that was very hot at the time,
Oh, yeah.
European
I mean,
entertainment.
tiny Americans are a dime a dozen.
But he really, I mean, he grooms General Tom to be this really world class performer, and they go on tours. And it's by the time that he passes away, Tom Thumb, at 46, he is a millionaire, and was, really well renowned across the globe. And most of the performers that worked for Barnum at this time were paid very well. They were boarded in the museum. They had their own rooms upstairs. And it was kind of a really good life situation for them,
Yeah.
honestly, at the time. But after Barnum's death, uh, well, actually, sorry, rewind. So, as he's touring with Tom Thumb, he realizes like there's a real market for this as a touring act for, the American Museum's in New York. People can come see it, but he's like, I want to take this to the masses. So he teams up with a little guy named Bailey. maybe you
Mhm.
maybe you've heard of him.
Mhm.
And that is where the Barnum and Bailey Greatest Show on Earth is formed. Bailey is touring his, big tent circus acts, and Barnum basically tags off of that to do his sideshow, and he'll have the acts of the freaks outside to entertain people while they wait to get into the circus. Um, of course, this is, controversial,
Yeah.
but at the time, very, very popular. So then, after Barnum's death, people start mimicking, his pattern. They realize how successful he was with this, and we start seeing uh, freak shows all over the United States, specifically at amusement parks, and as those start popping up in the major cities. Again, looking for new sources of entertainment, we start seeing a lot of, the first Ferris wheel and roller coasters popping up
Mhm.
everywhere. And the freak show group tags onto this. And of course, this is where Coney Island becomes what we think of Coney Island as today. Um, the first big Coney Island park to have their own freak show was Dreamland, and the owner, Samuel Gompers, was really credited with making the like Coney Island experience what people remember it as.
Mm.
Um, he made a place in Dreamland called Midget City.
Love
Uh,
it. Great. Sounds good.
yeah, and but it was built to scale, and there were 300 little people who lived there year round. And so he gave them this city to live, and everything was, made for them, basically.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, Dreamland did burn down, but Samuel Gompers, being the entrepreneur that he was, before they had even like cleared the rubble of Dreamland. I saw one guy talking about this on a History Channel interview. He said the ground was still too hot to walk on, and
Oh.
Gompers was already in there building up the seaside sideshow. He was and this is where I think what I at least think of when I think of like quote freak shows,
Yeah.
the banner lines with the big graphic illustrations, which many of those are
Mhm.
still standing in Coney Island today. um this is where the real heat of this entertainment starts up, and people are very excited about it. Lots of other people try to follow suit, starting other freak shows in this area on Coney Island, and they can't secure enough performers. So this is where people start faking a lot of things.
Yeah.
Siamese twins that are bound together by like a girdle under a giant dress kind of situation. um, but it becomes very, very popular until we start getting the advances in medical science and people realize that these quote freaks are actually, human beings with medical afflictions.
Yeah.
And that begins the decline of the freak show. The height of them was right in between like the world wars, and then we start to see it taper off pretty rapidly. um, not only from the moral implications, because actually a lot of people tried to shut it down for moral reasons and were unsuccessful. But eventually, just the cost of keeping this up, room and board for all these entertainers, and insurance, and like all these many aspects, the cost of renting ground at the fairgrounds, etc., just becomes too much, and most of them close down. So that is kind of our up to now
Mhm.
history of it. Um, and this is where, yeah, I guess I kind of want to bring up us to have a chat about this.
Yes.
This again, like, is it exploitation or is it empowerment? Because there were a lot of, and I'm not saying one answer is right or
Mhm.
wrong, but a lot of these folks, could not get a traditional job at the time, um, and B, a lot of the people did not want the people who performed did not want the shows to get closed down when people were getting really upset about the moral implications of it. The performers were like, do not take this away from us.
Yeah.
um, I did see someone talked about the word freak was really a hot button issue in this, and that in the community, the choice of the word freak specifically means a person who has chosen this career,
Yeah.
not to be used for people who look like them, who are choosing to lead quote normal lives.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I don't know, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, it's definitely something that I think there's no right answer to. I did watch back in the day, I feel like it was on A&E or something. I watched some kind of like documentary series about like a modern freak show, and
Mm-hmm.
like people who like are like, yeah, we're reclaiming this, and like this is kind of what we're up to. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really interesting, and I think like it's definitely true that there are a lot of people who did like performing and probably had a better life than they would have had they not been able to work as an entertainer. But I mean, obviously, it speaks so much to the time that it was, one of the only options for people. Like, I think
Absolutely.
obviously, there are still a ton of issues today, but it is some of our like social advances have made it easier for people with certain disabilities or medical issues to live the life that they choose, instead of being like,
Right.
well, you can sit at home and feel like a burden, or people can come and gawk at you. uh
Right. No,
so
absolutely.
yeah, but I mean, like, I definitely respect people who are like, yeah, I have this thing that makes me different and I want to show it off, and like it
Mm-hmm.
makes me happy to perform and to do this. And I mean, I also, you wonder, how many of those people are like, oh yeah, like I'm a great singer, and the fact that I have this other thing like has given me the opportunity to be an entertainer when that's what I would have wanted to be, but maybe it's harder, just to be an average non-distinctive person
Right.
to
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
your
Like
way in
capitalize on that.
entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's, I mean, too, I mean, a lot of these folks, I mean, I'm sure like camaraderie of being
Mhm.
with other people who understand your existence, understand what you're going through. Like a lot of these groups were like families, and many of them like got married and fell in love
Yeah.
in these situations. And I mean, it's like anything. There's positives and there's negatives. But you know, I hate to compare it this way, but it's kind of what it brings up for me. It's kind of like, to me, the argument that's being had about like sex work
Oh, yeah.
modernly. It's like, if that's the choice you want to make with your body and that's what you want to do, go for it. Like, you know. But yeah, like you said, if that's your only choice rather than sitting at home and doing nothing, then that sucks.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that with even within that same analogy, it's like the focus of people should not be to be like, hey, you individual person needs to stop doing this. It's,
Hmm.
hey, we need to make sure that the world is such that people are having a choice about what they want to do.
Definitely, yeah. And there are, I found there are still a few like modern freak shows. There's still a couple around. There's one, well, one is, this is actually interesting. It's called Reynolds Believe It If You're Nuts. Couldn't imagine what that's a play on. But he actually is one of the last remaining like talkers from the like traditional sideshow days.
Mm.
So the structure of the sideshow was like they would have a little ballyhoo stage out front, um and with the banner line with all the imagery of like, come see the bearded lady, blah blah blah. And then they would have a talker out front, who would be like, the come on, come all kind of
Mhm.
guy. And they would have maybe like one or two of the acts out on the ballyhoo with him, to basically tease the show and get people to come in and buy, right? So this man, uh, Reynolds, is like, that was his career, and he was so like enamored with it when he saw
Mhm.
it the first time that he's like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm gonna do with my life. And so he still to this day works on Coney Island, and he has this exposition, but it is much more of a like a museum. It's a lot of
Mhm.
like, things in formaldehyde, weird taxidermy, that kind of stuff. There's no live acts really anymore. Um, but there is a this is what kind of what you were talking about. There is a sideshow by the seashore on Coney Island still, and these are like folks who, like you said, kind of are reclaiming this for themselves, and they have just a variety of live performers who do different acts. But it is really interesting too, and this other gentleman, well, so Jim Rose Circus, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was really like popular in the 90s. They did like a rock and roll sideshow
Ooh.
type thing, and it's a lot of, sword swallowers and fire eaters and all these, I'm balancing a lawnmower on my head kind of thing.
Mhm.
And he though talks about something interesting, that like now in 2022, what it would take for shock value for
Yeah.
people, because a lot of his performers, and same with this sideshow at the seaside, a lot of these performers, the shock value is like they had gauges or they were tattooed all over their face,
Yeah.
or like, things that in like the late 80s early 90s people were like, oh my goodness.
What?
But now, like, everybody's tattooed. Like, three of my cousins have gauges. Like, it's it's interesting to think, like, is that a type of entertainment that could even exist today? There's really especially with television and things, there's just not a lot of things, and CGI, like what's going to shock us so much that we would pay to see it?
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, I was kind of thinking as we were like talking about all this different stuff, just of like how much more visibility and control over like narratives that like disabled people have today. Like
Absolutely.
there are, I see plenty of people on TikTok who are, openly talking about, what is going on if they look, if, part of their body doesn't look like what someone expects it to.
Hmm.
And just being like, hey, this is how I live my life and this is what's up with me. And, obviously, back in the olden days when you only saw, people in your kind of immediate
Immediate
vicinity.
vicinity.
Yeah, like it was like, whoa, this guy's super tall. Or, like thinking about like Lobster Boy as like another
Yep.
classic sideshow, his hands aren't like five-fingered hands, but we
Hmm.
see that now. And also we see it, hopefully, I mean, I'm sure some people still do not, but hopefully you see it also with the humanity of that person.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. We're trained to see them. I'm not trained. Yeah, like you see them as like, oh, that's a human being, like a differently abled human being. Like
Yeah,
that's
and
not.
it helps, it makes it less shocking to be like, "Oh yeah, this is, just one of the variations that people come in," and it doesn't have to be scary.
Yeah, and that's that's also like the interesting thing too, though. At least, so I watched some interviews with folks who were part of sideshows,
Mhm.
and for the most part, I mean, there were several folks who chose to walk away from it at a certain point, but
Mhm.
for the most part, these accounts they tell, it's like they didn't see it as people like gawking at them or
Yeah.
laughing at them. And I don't know, I find it fascinating. I think it's, especially like I said, in that time, was it like, is it good that that was the mentality at the time? Absolutely not. But if those people found power and empowerment and like reclaimed their identity by doing that, I think it is a really cool, interesting thing, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's natural to be intrigued by someone who is different from you, and like
Yeah.
at the
Well, that's
time this was the way that you saw people who were different from you, and that's not necessarily like a bad instinct to have, to want to be like, whoa, like what's that about.
yeah.
It's
That's
just it's
they
changed.
interviewed
We've
yeah. They interviewed this man who was like, one of the quote giants, and he's like, people were calling me a freak by the time I was 7.
Yeah,
He said, at least like in this venue I got paid for it.
right.
I was like, yeah, pop off, bud, get that money.
Oh, show. Yeah, I like, and I mean, as you mentioned the similarly named event, I mean, I have been, there's a Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Wisconsin Dells.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I have been there and like seen all of the weird bits and bobs. And actually, side note, while I was trying to look up like weird Wisconsin stuff for the
Hmm.
Hodag in Wisconsin episode, I found out that there is the actual head of a German serial killer at the Ripley's Believe It or Not in Wisconsin Dells,
What?
which is terrifying. And I am glad, I don't think I realized that because I was there in like high school and I probably would have been really freaked out.
Do you know which serial killer?
I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I will look it up for you.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was very weird to see that. But yeah, like I mean, and those are the kind of places that have like, oh, a Fiji mermaid, a two-headed calf, and
Right.
stuff like that in jars and things.
The fun fact, the gentleman Reynolds on Coney Island has the original Fiji mermaid still. It is
Oh,
still on display
nice.
on Coney Island.
That's very
Um,
cool.
but yeah, I actually had Ripley's in my notes because I think that was kind of the thing of our generation.
Mhm.
I mean, I think the original show was in like the 80s, but I mean, there was a reboot in like 2004, I think, that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember very vividly. And I remember always like looking at the Ripley's books at book fair and stuff.
Yes.
Um, I don't know, the human fascination with oddities is I've just always been fascinated, and not even like human like curiosities, but just oddities in any sense. I think is
Oh,
so
yeah.
interesting. I
I
could
mean, I am hoping to go to Oddities and Curiosities Expo when it
yes.
comes to Milwaukee this spring, and they do have like a obviously, it's primarily, makers and creators of cool things, but like they also have like a traveling exhibit with it, with
How cool.
strange things. And I think, when we talked about the Haunted Mansion, they talked about having that Museum of the Weird was the like original
Yes.
concept for it. Like people love going and looking at weird stuff.
Yeah, definitely. That's man, not that I'm bummed. But I got offered like VIP tickets to the Oddities and Curiosities Expo in Kansas
Ooh.
City this past summer, and it was the dates that I was in New Jersey for Spirit. I
Oh
was
man.
so
Well,
like
hope.
I'm not bummed because it was it was a great reason to miss, but I was like, dang, I really hope that they ask
Yeah.
me back next year because it was so cool. um but yeah, I mean that's there's still a lot of I wanted to bring up my kind of last little point, just bringing it into today, um there's still a lot of uh references in pop culture and I mean the most obvious thing that comes to mind was 2014 American Horror Story
Oh yeah.
did the freak show season, which I may be one of the 7 people alive who liked that season. I know that's like a massively unpopular opinion, but I really enjoyed it. And I think it brought a new wave of understanding because Sarah Paulson's character was based on real. I mean, well, actually, most of the characters in that
Yeah.
season were based on real people. But Daisy and Violet Hilton, who were kind of the big like Siamese twin act that existed in the like they were in the late 30s, early 40s, I believe.
Mhm.
But they are also who the musical Sideshow is based on, uh, which is a great musical. If you're not familiar with it, go listen to the soundtrack. It's wonderful. But it got revived in 2014, also right after American Horror Story came out, and that was a really cool time. They really um, there was a lot of stuff being written at that point to kind of telling the stories of these performers in a new light and like really explaining their side of things and what they went through,
Mhm.
both positively and negatively. And I I hope I hope that if this is something that interests you at all, you will go read like accounts of these
Mhm.
performers because it really is amazing. And these people were so resilient and went through so much and like made such a path for themselves. It's very cool. um, but I would, I also, if you liked Freak Show, American Horror Story Freak Show, DM me. Let's talk about it. Nobody else liked it anyway.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, I figured that might be a little bit uh, overly spooky for you.
I've watched a few American Horror Stories. I'm not a big Ryan Murphy fan.
You know what? That's valid. Even as a person who likes the show, that's
Yeah,
valid. I mostly watch it for Jessica Lange and
that's
Sarah
fair.
Paulson.
They are very that's I watched some of it because there were some, very cool people and some cool concepts. But I did not make it that far. I was kind of like, okay, I've had enough of this.
That's enough. Thank you. Well, that is all for my little chat about circus sideshows today. Thank you all so much for listening. If you are enjoying Ghouls Night In, which we certainly hope you are, be sure to leave us a review wherever you ingest your podcasts. We have one to read today.
Ooh.
Let's see what we've got here. We have from I'm I'm gonna probably say this wrong. It might be Hallie Girl, Halea, Halea, Hallie.
Mm.
Sorry if I'm butchering your name, but the review says simply spooky, 5 stars. I love this podcast. It's giving me life until October gets here. I like how Penny and Midge do all the deep dives and research, but still keep it light on the seriously spooky details. I can't handle most horror films, but I love Halloween, so I appreciate this. More, please.
Oh.
Well,
Relatable.
yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, do be sure to leave us a review if you want to have it read here live on the air.
Yes.
And if you would like to follow more details on what's happened over here at the pod, you can give us a follow on Instagram at Ghouls Night in Pod. And if you're looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And that is all. Until next time.
Goodbye.